Good afternoon, and special thanks to NUS and the DBS Foundation for the invitation and the opportunity to join you here. Today, what I will share is the kind of new challenge for social enterprises, which has to do with developing together the ability to build new industries, to enter to a level of scale that is really about mainstreaming social entrepreneurship. Now, mainstreaming social entrepreneurship requires, as you will see through the examples that I will share, that we rethink our roles and that we rethink also how do we go about developing new kinds of tools, hybrid tools that account for both the rigor of business and at the same time the commitment and the values that social impact requires. In order to position this topic, we need to start by redefining what we mean by scale. And a lot has been said about social enterprises in the context of direct impact, in the context of scaling the accessibility to products and services. But we also know that many of those startups and enterprises that are created are many times limited by the kind of ecosystem in which they live. And that means that just as you have entrepreneurs, business and social entrepreneurs that are focusing on that accessibility to products and services, you also have another category, one that focuses on seeding the new industry, in actually spreading the new visions, the new solutions, and creating those ecosystems. A good example of that is a journey that started more than 30 years ago, and I'm sure all of you know about, which is the creation of the microfinance industry around the world. That industry wasn't a straightforward multiplication of one microfinance institution at a time. Parallel to that, what you had was the creation of the enabling environment in each one of the countries in which new MFIs were established. And sometimes very good teams undertaking these new endeavors fail because those conditions were not there. And that's why people playing the role, the dual role that somebody like Mohamed Yunus played are important. He, at one hand, was the one that established Grameen Bank, but he was also the one that started a global movement that created that capacity to create the enabling environment in each one of the countries. Now, the third and last type of entrepreneurship that I would like to see, if the first one is about direct delivery of services, and the second one is about seeding a new industry, the third one, it's about frame change, and it's equally important. There are a group of entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs in the world that are increasingly looking at social entrepreneurship from the perspective of creating movements. And that implies helping people to see opportunities in a new way. And I remember 30 years ago being in sessions about microfinance in which it was being argued whether microfinance should exist at all, if it was really feasible. And there were tons of skeptics. And I'm sure all the applicants to this challenge have also faced that kind of skepticism. And the only way to break through that is by actively changing mindsets and helping to see those new opportunities. So let me take you through a few examples that will show how changing mindset, creating that enabling environment, and mainstreaming social entrepreneurship could be about. And the first example that I want to mention is it's about West Africa and access to energy. you have a potential market in the order of 10 million families that would need access to electricity. And the reality is that the majority of the groups working on it, they may have good solutions, but they don't have the capacity to scale. The infrastructure is not there, the ecosystem it will take decades to build it, and so on. So a group of 5 citizen sector organizations that were providing access to energy through different models of social entrepreneurship, they basically approach Total, the energy company, and look and explore with them the possibility of Total being a company open to leveraging the infrastructure of gas stations around West Africa to sell solar lanterns through their system. Now, if the social enterprises would have continued focusing on marketing and distributing this directly themselves, they would stay at the aggregated number of 200,000 a year. When Total entered into the equation, Total, an oil company basically said, I have nothing to do with solar solutions. So for them at the beginning, it was a bit of like corporate for social responsibility. Let's try, let's test, let's discover. But at the end of the day, what it happened was that Total not only was open to leverage their assets and infrastructure and agree to put on to offer the solar lanterns in their gas stations, they also provided something equally valuable, which is the possibility of offering for the first time a guarantee associated to a large, very well-positioned brand name, that every person, every family was going to be able to buy this, and in buying it, they would have access to a replacement if this wasn't working. Lo and behold, what it ended up happening is that in a year later, you have over 1 million families now with access to electricity. And they are already in the path of making a dent on the true market, which is 10 million. Now, how can we have more of that entrepreneurship? How can we actually not only think about social enterprise, the growth has an organic growth, but actually breakthrough solutions in which social enterprises like the ones that we'll be presenting today are also a source of disruptive innovation for large corporations. And that requires to act at the 3 levels that I was mentioning at the beginning: direct delivery, system change, and also frame change, because of the skepticism that they face. The second example increases the level of complexity, and it's an example led by a company, a French company, a yogurt company, dairy company. And what they did was to challenge their investors, and they authorized the investment of 1% of their annual profits to create a business social venture fund to transform the value chains of the company. And that implies that they were willing to, they basically set aside 110 million euros to invest on collaborations between citizen sector organizations, both for-profit and non-profit, with teams of Danone that would look at their value chain and experiment and prototype transformations to that. They did it in terms of, for instance, sourcing milk not from large producers, but sourcing milk from small farmers. And in order to source milk at large volumes from small farmers, imagine how that increased the complexity if you don't have the right kind of solution. And that's where the social enterprises had the role of disruptive innovators. Because when Danone teams collaborated with the social enterprises, what they end up finding was that they not only were able to source milk at the volumes that they needed when they had the right kind of partners and the right kind of knowledge, but that they would also be able to do it more cost effective than when sourcing from large ones. And also they were mitigating their risk because they had more suppliers. If one supplier would discontinue, they had many more. So this notion the company has also applied to other products with a lot of success, but it required to suspend judgment, it requires to be humble, it requires to actually look at partnerships in a new way and to listen and truly be open to learn about new ways. A third and last example that I will mention, it's another level of complexity, which is illustrated by a huge opportunity, probably one of the largest in the world, which is affordable housing in India. If you try to solve the scope of a challenge like affordable housing in India, what you will face is a challenge that is 24 million homes, new homes are needed. 24 million, there is nothing of that scope in the world. And if you translate that into a market opportunity, it's probably a complete new frontier, $222 billion. But a new industry, that you try to do it with the current tools at hand, it's impossible to tackle. You don't have enough real estate developers that know about affordable housing. You don't have mortgage finance institutions that would be willing to finance people without payroll stuff, even if they have the money. And the street vendors and the rickshaw drivers in India may have the resources to pay for a $15,000, $20,000 apartment, but they will never qualify for a mortgage unless mortgage finance institutions change their mindsets about the viability of those customers. And who would accomplish that change? Who would actually, in a fragmented industry like that is in many respects broken, because of the reasons that I just mentioned, and in addition, because the solutions that are out there are very poorly developed, then you need a kind of social entrepreneur that would look at this challenge as an integrator, that it would look at being truly a system integrator. And is one that it will be connecting the dots on multiple players in the industry, some existing, some new, and that will bring sense to something that right now, if you look at it, I mean, if you're an investor, for instance, and would like to invest in India and you are only analyzing it one deal at a time, you probably will never go for it. Well, the Ashoka, the organization that I work at, triggered this kind of change in several cities in India, and we prototype and experiment with those partnerships. Initially, we needed philanthropic funding for that. We invested in the order of $3 million to create those enabling conditions. And that has resulted in over $150 million of private capital being invested because the solutions were demonstrated. And a key element for any kind of this hybrid sector collaboration, of this business social entrepreneurship, this mainstreaming of the concept of social entrepreneurship, is about different facets of collaboration. Collaboration that needs to start with a new way of organizing work, with a new way of understanding your role, and definitely listening in new ways, listening from what some are starting to call cognitive empathy. Not the empathy that is looking at the needs of the poor, for instance, from the perspective of how poor they are, but from the perspective of truly putting yourself in the other person's shoes wholly. Has many of those that described yesterday their ventures to us, they had an understanding of their client needs that it was putting themselves in their position, not as an expert, but truly learning from those potential clients. Now, I was in talking about collaboration, we can go the route of thinking that collaboration across sectors is going to slow us down, that it's too complex, that it takes too much time. Or we can actually step back and say, we need a new kind of approach to collaboration. We need to be trained for collaboration. We need to deconstruct what works and what doesn't when we mean ecosystem building. And in most places around the world, very little research has been done about it. It's a new frontier. And it's a frontier that I think all of us here who are working in this area need to push the boundaries of and develop new knowledge, new applications. But in order to do that effectively, we at least have to do one thing that it may sound a bit drastic. We have to move beyond that vision of entrepreneurship as this solo journey of a hero that is going to make the change happen by himself or herself alone. It requires that we actually see ourselves like enablers, like coaches of teams, and it requires that we understand what we don't know, that we build this kind of partnerships in a way that are complementary and a win-win for everyone. Now, the challenge ahead, in order to mainstream social entrepreneurship, is that many actors need to innovate what they are doing, ranging from the entrepreneurs themselves, business and social. Also, the philanthropists, they need to understand hybridness in new ways. The investors, the social impact investors, need to be open to collaborate with philanthropists in new ways. Definitely governments and also universities. You are part of a new generation that it's now being immersed in this world. And it is in universities like this is starting to be taught. 10 years ago, it was a new topic that at business school would have never been discussed. So what I would like to invite you today is to think ahead on what do we have to do today in order to build a future in which each one of us is truly contributing to reinvent the kind of capitalism in which we were born, to actually dare to think very differently about what is the kind of neural system that we need to build of collaborations for the economy and the economic systems that we have to address the good of all, to take care of the level of scaling up of business solutions that is needed to improve the lives of millions that are living in conditions that are no longer acceptable. So I would like to leave you with new ambitions and also with a level of humbleness that I hope you will share and that it will ignite in you the need to listen in new ways, explore in new ways, and reach out to collaborators even when on the surface they may seem your competitors. Thank you very much.